The reading comes from the letter of Paul to the Phillippians, chapter 4, 4-9. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and reheard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. Here ends the reading. Thanks be to God.
When it comes to the book of Philippians, it's probably easier just to skip to the end. The verses we heard this morning are in the latter stages of the letter from Paul to the church in Philippi. At this point, in order to summarize the letter, Paul's advice to rejoice and focus on worthy things is easier to digest than the previous several chapters about the debates about who's in charge and the squabbles in the church about what proper service looks like, or their very reason to be. When Paul says that they should focus on that which is pure or just or praiseworthy, rest assured that he has said in the prior verses that at times this Philippian church has been occupied by things that aren't pure, just, or praiseworthy. Who's got the time? He seems to be saying, for arguments like the ones that you all are having. Who's got the time? What you all need to be doing is not walking around thinking that you're better than anyone else. Get out of your own heads, your own selves. Empty yourself out. Serve others. And if and when you get distracted by that, focus on whatever is good, true, pure, commendable, and so on. Who's got time for these arguments that you all are having? Much has been said, of course, about the era in which we live and how we communicate with each other. Echo chambers, the opportunity to self-edit, the manner in which we debate. The Philippians had to look at each other most of the time when they argued, but we're under no such constraints. We can tear each other down with a few keystrokes. We can block each other if we don't like what the other is saying, because after all, who's got time for certain kinds of arguments? It used to be that you might go to a social gathering and stay away from two familiar topics, politics and religion, but more and more one finds oneself in gatherings where religion might still stay off the table, but increasingly we find ourselves among people with whom we are more or less aligned politically. Such is the enmity in our society that we choose to attend events where those people will not be present. And so the result is, in part, that we're not terribly good at talking to people of differing persuasions. We either don't invite them to the party, we block them online, or we choose to shout at them, or just ignore them. Charitable, kind, loving debate went out of the window sometime in the past, it seems. And then in the United States of America, we have this holiday called Thanksgiving. And Paul's words, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things, sometimes becomes a task to endure with gritted teeth as we pass the carrots. And if we're not particularly good at talking to people of differing persuasions, surely it is in part because we don't get a lot of practice. It seems like an incredibly quaint anachronism for a married couple to have gentle debates with each other while leaving children to absorb which parent might have had a more compelling worldview. Then in America, we have Thanksgiving. And this Thanksgiving or holiday season, we're most likely going to be out of our comfort zones no matter who we are. Who here, after all, has got tons and tons of experience sorting through family, holidays, religion, and politics when impeachment hearings happened the week before? Paul is certainly not suggesting that we no longer worry about the problems of the world or that we shouldn't craft arguments around issues that are important to us. He fiercely advocates for his own viewpoint. However, here in chapter 4, he's describing a default setting, an overriding disposition that people in the Philippian church ought to return to in order to inform the debates that they are having. After all, he seems to be saying, what's the point in having these debates if you've forgotten about why you're here in the first place? Last weekend, I was officiating at my brother-in-law's wedding in Arizona. The service was lovely. It was outside, 78 degrees. Everyone was happy, I think. It's a new day in America, right? One of the ways in which I experienced this new day is when people I don't know approach me at such a service and they ask me if I belong to a church or if I got ordained the week before the service online. A lady approached me and asked me who I was and if I had a church, and then inquired what kind of church I belonged to. I said I was a minister in the United Church of Christ, and that usually takes some unpacking, so I was ready to explain what that meant. But she simply nodded, and she said in a very not particularly complimentary fashion, that explains some things. And I thought, this is a joke, right? Like, she's going to break character in a moment. But she didn't break character. Just as I was about to follow up on this with some gentle, inquisitive questioning about what she meant, my brother-in-law, who was stood nearby, interrupted this conversation, gently encouraged this lady to make her way back to where she was sitting at the reception, and then apologized to me. And I thought there was no need. In fact, I thought how fantastic, how wonderful it was to have no clue whatsoever where that came from or what she meant by that. To be absolutely dumbfounded by an interaction with another person at an event like that, where by any measure I am now essentially an insider at this point, having married to Stacy for 15 years or more. Not or more, 15 years, and then some more. I have been accused of following my notes a little too closely at times. That's why. So context matters, right? Your context matters. And your anchor points, they matter too. The place that you just were or your mindset that you have to begin a conversation and launching off point all matter. It wasn't that I know how to avoid defensiveness. It was just that I had spent the whole wedding service babbling away about the miraculous and extraordinary nature of the day that permitted me to be inquisitive with this lady rather than incredibly defensive about what she meant. That explains some things. I'd preached an hour before, maybe even less, talking about how beautiful it was that my brother-in-law and his new spouse were both living lives as healthcare providers or therapists dedicating to helping people with addiction issues. That their whole lives are dedicated to miracles, because what is one more day for many people, or one more moment for some people, other than a miracle, a day at a time, a moment at a time for people who have given up on another moment or another day? I talked about their relatives who were immigrants on both sides of their family, and how lots of people had made these incredible journeys to America. And the married couple needed every single one of those journeys to happen 3, 4, or more generations ago in order for that day to happen. And I talked about, the whole story of us, this whole idea that we go days and days, or perhaps even lifetimes, while barely acknowledging the whole, oh my gosh, I'm on this rock that is currently rotating at 1,000 miles an hour while traveling around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour. This rock that exploded out in some form or another 14 billion and a bit years ago, that is positioned ever so conveniently from a star burning plasma whose surface temperature is more than 5,000 Kelvin. And it's just absolutely perfect if you happen to find yourself on a rock traveling at 67,000 miles an hour, 93 and a bit million miles from that star of burning plasma. That's our deal. And so that was my default setting when someone said to me, that explains some things, and perhaps why that thing, which is actually in some ways a part of my identity, a key part, that I'm a minister in the United Church of Christ, was left right there at the wedding reception. Of course, the idea is that in the church, we ground ourselves in a larger story whenever we meet. Today is the fusion of many aspects of that larger story. Two parents and their two oldest children went before a group of people and spoke to the values, ethics, and ideals they wished to impart to the youngest member of their family. The water, the most essential of all things to life, a sign of purity and beauty in its simplicity, a mark of an inward grace and an outward act, promises and affirmations, fun, smiles, a tear or two perhaps, and a blessing. You are our brother. That changes things if that's your default setting, if that's your launching off point. It doesn't diminish the things that are happening in the world, but it regrounds us, moves us to potentially standing among a different paradigm. Remembering if my default setting is grounded in thanksgiving for the teachings and inspiration of those who have gone before us, well, that does have the capacity to amend our paradigm as well. Especially when we remember today people like Lisa Kennedy and Angela Conrad Oste. Two very different people, but both having left us way too soon. Both grounded in a deep compassion for others. Two fiercely intelligent women who left a legacy of inclusion and kindness that reminds us of the old Franciscan adage to preach the gospel and use words only when necessary. We all have people, teachers, inspirations, mentors, guides, people who took us under their wing, people who taught us to read and write and think differently and hopefully to get out of our own way and our own heads sometimes and appreciate the majesty of this universe. And if that's your default setting, that might change how you approach others, how you talk in thornier, unpracticed discussions. And the bread of life, the breaking of bread at a table where all are welcome, all are received, all can receive equally, all have the capacity for renewing hope, shedding burdens, giving them to God. The bread of life which reminds us that Jesus really did serve those opposed to him, really did empty himself and his own spirit in order to serve, really did do these things that are the grounds for which Paul implores the church members in Philippi to focus on. We all have a lot of worries and a lot of concerns. There's a lot to worry about. And for some of us this week, the Thanksgiving table might actually be one of them. But of course, there is a quirk to Paul's writing. He says, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise. And the text shouts underneath this passage, of course there is. Oh my gosh, open your eyes and your ears. Of course there is. Of course there is so much to be thankful for. Of course there are so many blessings. Of course there is excellence. Of course there are things that are worthy of praise. So think about those things in order to ground yourself as your launching off point, as your beginning point, as your anchor point. And not just on Thursday. Peace be with you.